was them. They would have been planted in a similar way to those other ones, because what worked out, under the controls they were obliged, the reason I'm going into detail here, I'm trying to show you the nature of the scientists that are running these things, and these are the ones that go to government and others, so we've got to go down the GE path. I'm trying to show you how shonky they are and how the system is, because IRMA, now the EPA, is the organisation that gives approvals for these things. Then they set controls. They say, okay, what are the risks? If we're going to give it to you, what are the worst risks? For these, it's pollen. Yeah, this thing causes me a bit of grief. We'll get rid of it for a moment and cross our fingers for it rolling on. So, out of the trees, what could possibly go wrong? One of it is materials taken away and it somehow gets into other organisms, some new genetic material. And one of the easiest ways is pollen. So you've got to get rid of your flowering structures and make sure the pollen's not released and or cones ultimately develop and those seeds.
What about the bees taking the
nectar, pollen,
resins?
Yeah,
all
that's a good point. I haven't thought of that until now about that, and because I'm doing some work around bees and the neonicotinoid poisons, I'm aware of different oozings and stuff from different plants, and some's nectar and some's resins. So IRMA does the decision, does the controls. MAF, Biosecurity New Zealand, which is now part of the Ministry of Primary Industries, it's just been lost in there just as food safety has. They were then the inspectors. It's by law, it's not even regulation, by law, they are the ones to then check that the controls are done. They've got to go and audit and make sure things happen correctly. What they did, they came to an arrangement with science and said, don't worry about the 2.5 metre thing, just go for it. Do your 4.5 metres, because you can see those other straggly trees hadn't bushed up. So we'll let you not bother pruning till then. But they didn't even tell IRMA. They didn't tell anyone. So that's me speeding along the road, because I'm a bit of a speed freak, doing 120, 130 Ks. Policeman says, oh, Steffan, you're meant to be pruning. Look, the road's open, whatever, and I've got an appointment, whatever, and they say, fine. But don't fail to tell the legislators that the law's changed, or the regulations changed. These guys, the policeman, was doing the changes, and yet as a community, myself and plenty of others, had done submissions, and we were assured there'd be controls to make sure that things were done in a certain way. So we didn't appeal. We knew the controls were there. These guys, the whole system is shonky. Good, that's how you do it, Bob. They locked up in this last night. And here, we'll use the cursor. That's a rabbit. Rabbits are coming in and out under the fence. This fence, it's very high. You can see it in the background. Hot wires all the way down it, and another chain mesh on the other side of it. I think some barbed wire on the top too, and buried deep. But rabbits are getting in and out, and they would say, oh well, the rabbits, on their reports each year, we've poisoned them or we've shot them and we don't think there's any more problem. The next year it's the same, and we didn't even pick it up initially. They were rabbits, so rabbits or animals could come in and out. Later on I saw a cat in there, so I've gone down through the rabbit hole and come back up, obviously, so unless it came through the gate when it was open, can't imagine how else it got in. When we finally busted them and the report was done, they said, oh, look, the fence isn't there to stop animals, it's not a problem. They just say anything to get through. This is what I found when I did the couple of days up there. Those holes there were rabbit holes, and then that was a rabbit hole, but I couldn't get my arm to the bottom of it. But on the other side, it was very typical rabbit holes. On this side, it was because the public, there's a bike track around it, and there's people walk their dogs every day there. The dogs, obviously, they're trying to get at the rabbits. But in their report in the end, after the trees were cut down, they ended up, it was useful because it made them have to do a report on everything. MAF is still investigating the cause of these holes. It's not ruled out the possibility that these were man-made for publicity purposes, and they were going like that at me pretty much. I supplied them heaps of material, heaps of photos. So MAF was meant to be checking the fence at least monthly as well, and they clearly weren't. There was holes in underneath it, and they weren't checking. Why were they checking the fence? You know, if it wasn't to keep animals out, apart from keeping us out. Anyway, they ultimately cut down. They said they'd finished their experiment, and a few months after those other trees were cut down and there was all the hoo-ha, they said the experiment was done, they'd worked out what they needed to work out, and they chopped down those other bigger trees. They were probably about that round at the time, at the base. Then they went on, and later they did another little application or an extension of one of the earlier ones to keep their experimentation alive. Albeit they weren't operating it, they just kept their application alive rather. And then they went for another application for this one that I talked of before. Well, it's not even 4,000 trees, it's up to 20,000, so many at a time and all that, and you multiply it out, it's something like 4,000 or so. They took down the shelter belt that was behind those other trees that you saw in the earlier photos. They were in there with all sorts of contractors doing this and that, and some iwi group let us know that they were going for another application because they were getting early consultation. I said, so I went up there and all this work was being done. I said, oh, how come you're doing all this work? We haven't even got an application out yet. So you're spending tens of thousands of dollars, clearly, because you wouldn't do it for less, and yet you haven't even got an application. Is Irma such a rubber stamper that you're doing that? They said, oh, no, nothing of the sort. We're getting ready for a lawn mowing contract, for a mowing contract. This is what they said. They said it publicly. You can go into the media and find it. But of course they were going for it, and soon enough up came the application. So this is the nature of what they put in eventually. So that's the old compound. You can see the wires right up to the top. And it's further out. So it's a big perimeter one. And they've got a 4 hectare site, I think, approved ultimately out of that deal. They have since been attacked, and I'm not sure if I've got more recent photos. I have got photos elsewhere, but there are very, very few of those survived. They're looking pretty bad. I'll just hop back to that. There's another bundle. I've got fresh photos that haven't got onto there, sitting in a shade house within the compound, a new shade house that's clearly they've got some more to get planted. But I'll talk about cyan again later. Crop and Food down at Lincoln, in the same sort of era, we're doing an onions trial that they've been given permission for. And you see buckwheat around the edge flowering, so there's some sort of buffer, and there's different little onion patches, and there's various scientists and relevant people there. Oh, Kieran Alvarez even there over there, who's one of the Irma decision makers, but worked for Horticulture New Zealand, because there's all this conflict of interest for the people making the decisions for Irma, basically having smoko in the same smoko room as the scientists that were applying for it. There's stuff like that going on. Even that field trial, out of their reports, we found that they dropped some seed or some onion plantlets outside the area that they're meant to be growing in. So it's just, just a continuous problem. That was finished, partly as well. They made some stories that it was too near Lincoln, and the neighbours didn't like the alarms going off or something. Something was setting the alarms off. It wasn't us. I don't know what that was all about. But ultimately, that was stopped. But they applied for another experiment for 11 different allium family onions, spring onions. I assume red onions. There was leeks. There was garlic. But there was 11 different types. So they had an application they got through against us all submitting and doing everything as well. But this was the brassica, the main offending plant, in fact. When I found the plot and thought I'd go back and see, because it was summertime, December 22, 08, to see what the new planting was like, and scratched my head about it. I didn't find a new planting. I found lots of weeds and some regrowth brassicas in amongst them. And I did some photos, and then I popped back to my accommodation that night, was going through it, looking at the reports, trying to make sense of it, and realised that, holy hell, this photo is a seed pod on a brassica, and it's got a seed pod. It's been pollinated by something, by an insect, most likely. And the label at the bottom had Cry 1AB. Now, when I got that the next day when I went back with the reporter, because when I busted and I call it busted, they used to say busted the other direction a lot, but I said, when we busted Scion, and then people went in and cut some trees down, we put out a media release about it, they just rounded on me, right through to Jim Anderton, who was the minister at the time, and even Trevor Mallard in the later years called me an eco-terrorist and that because of my connection theoretically with it. And I just thought, how the heck am I going to do this so that they're wrong, but I don't want them telling their lies and twisting it like they did on Scion. So I got a reporter from the press, and I had to really cajole him a bit. I said, look, I've got this thing, I'm quite sure it's GE plant flowering, but I want you to come along. And he ended up working out really well because he liked the investigative stuff. We went out there and got permission from his boss that he could be there, even though it was on private property or whatever. And he wouldn't go in, but he could I let him take photos of me climbing the fence again. And I took some more photos, including the label, Cry 1AB. That's the Bacillus thuringiensis gene put into, it's the toxin they put in to get insect resistance in genetically engineered plants. So, and you can see there's different plants that are regrown, and some of them the leaves were fine and other ones were eaten. So you knew some were controls and some were getting eaten by the caterpillars, and others were working very effectively as insect resistance. So yeah,